Hello, everybody. My sincere apologies for keeping you waiting. We have had one or two technical problems, as can happen. I'm sure you found over the past 6 months where we've all become Zoom call and webinar obsessed. Sometimes the gremlins get in the works, and no matter what we do, we just can't cure them. We really appreciate your patience. Hope we haven't tried it too much, and hope we can make it up to you over the next hour or so as we welcome you to this inaugural collaboration between the Global Institute of Sport, henceforth to be known as GIS, and the Professional Golfers Association, also to be known, well, actually to be known as the PGA. I'm Mark Clement from BBC Radio and Television, your host. I'm going to explain to you about our guests in just a minute or two. I want to say a big welcome to friends, associates, partners of both GIS and the PGA, to PGA members around the world, to delegates from VSI, who are a sister organisation to the Global Institute of Sport, and to those of you that are currently on Global Institute of Sport courses or have shown an interest in them. You are all very welcome. And we have a truly global spread of people joining us today. A couple of little bits of housekeeping just before we get underway. If you want to alter your view, who you've got big, who you've got small, there's a circle on the bottom right-hand side of your screen there, black circle. You can see there with little various icons, and you can choose your view there. And down your left-hand toolbar, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 down, that's where we have our chat room. That's where you can make your points or put your questions across, and we'll try and get through as many of them as we can today. I work for BBC Radio 5 Live, the national news and sports station. I've done for the past 2 decades, and I also am pretty much a regular most Saturdays on BBC One on Football Focus and Final Score. On face value, football is my thing, but you know what? I am so lucky. I love to hear and love to help people tell their stories, find out how they got from A to B, what the challenges were along the way, and how it's marked them and helped to form their values and beliefs. And that has led me also, as well as being a broadcaster, into the events arena. And I've started to do a lot of work of late for the Global Institute of Sport, including launching their Sporting Global Summits in Melbourne in January, and would have been out in New York, Atlanta, and Toronto this year, but for this ghastly pandemic, so we had to do them virtually. I also host presentation skills courses for their master's intake and also their executive education program. So the theme today is leadership and management. The goal is to explore high performance, leadership principles, how to inspire individuals. And I have to tell you about our guests. I'm going to start, first of all, with our guest from the world of golf. He's joining us live from Munich. You can see him there on your screen where he lives. Ryder Cup winning 6 times, actually, and current coach of the 2018 Open Championship winner, Francesco Molinari. Dennis Pugh is with us. Good afternoon to you, Dennis.
Hi, Mark. Hi, everybody.
And here comes the bad news, folks. We have spent, well, I have personally, probably an hour and a half on the phone trying to connect Harry Redknapp today. And no matter what we try, what apparatus we try from Harry's end, whether it is phones, whether it is borrowing his beloved wife Sandra's iPad and stopping her from going on Zumba this afternoon, we have got so close to connecting him so many times. My sincere apologies. We've had to take this decision to start without him because we just can't connect all the fibers and make sure that he can hear us, we can hear them. I'm sure that will disappoint you. We'll try and make it up to you with, let's be frank, a man who's had 48 experience in the world of golf and at a supremely top level, and some of the top sports peoples over the last 3 or 4 decades he's been associated with. But my sincere apologies. We had hoped, obviously, Dennis, to juxtapose coaching individuals with coaching teams and how they interpose. Unfortunately, I don't think it is going to happen. So I'm going to start by asking you, I guess, will you define leadership in the sense of what you do in a couple of sentences for us? What's the sort of mantra that inspires and directs you on as you go about your business?
Well, one of the key things is comfortable, making people feel comfortable. And as you can see, I set the room up here to make Harry feel comfortable. I'm in the jungle now. But he's been there once and didn't want to go there again. But he was the king of the jungle, wasn't he? Great character, and I'm sad that he can't join us this afternoon. But in terms of, as I said, making people comfortable, you've got all different types of sportsmen that you have to deal with. So a coach is a leader. The coach has to say to the player and the group of players, if that's the case, there still are some teams in golf that you have to work with, is making sure that every player gets your full attention and he believes that you're working for him, not against him. I think that sums it up where I'm coming from. But comfort is the buzzword.
Yeah. I love that you made the effort on the jungle front. I think without doubt, there's no way Donald Trump could accuse Harry of rigging all those votes he got 2 years ago in I'm a Celebrity, because I think what we've proved today, ladies and gentlemen tuning in, is that maybe grasp of technology is not necessarily something that he's mastered. I mean, working for your coaches, and yet there is that dynamic of, at the end of the day, they are the ones that appoint you. So I guess one of my obvious questions is, who's the boss? Does it swing backwards and forwards? Do you make a pre-contract that, I'm going to test you and you're not going to like it all the time? Will you take us through that sort of chemistry, please, Dennis? Yeah,
I think firstly that as a coach, you've got to have credibility. So that comes in many quarters. One quarter, of course, is that you've been perhaps a good player, certainly good enough to have the feelings of what it's like to play professionally. I think if you're a superstar player, it must be even more difficult, because often the coaches in all sports, if they have been superstars, can't relate to why the player can't do what they could do by instinct. So getting credibility from being a player, but as a coach, you also need to have credibility by your knowledge. The things that the things that that are up to date, correct, and not old wives' tales, nothing about things that have always been said, so they must always been right. Then the third thing you need visibility and being able to be visible to the player so that they've seen the successes you've had, they respect your knowledge, and they're comfortable in your company. So they're the things that start the process, but you can't be a coach without someone to coach. So at the top level, of course, you tend to deal with managers, their agents, to get the contract up and running. And then it's pretty much a case of, you always know that they're the boss, but you have to have the confidence to know if you lead the way, they will follow. But ultimately, a bit like being a football coach, most of the time you're going to get fired at some stage. And it's that acceptance that ego-wise and other people may not find easy. But look, if you know you're going to get coached, you just do your job. And if the player doesn't like it, you move on, because immediately try and feed the player, you aren't doing your job. And that's how it works. Well, which leads us rather nicely. I mean, I love the ebb and flow of your career, and 3 times attempting to be a sort of self-funded professional golfer yourself, and then this incredible journey that you've had that's taken you from being the golf professional to the States, and everything you've been involved with along the way. But Monty, I mean, he fired you how many times and then reinstated you? I mean, was that a love-hate relationship you had there? No, I think it was more hate rather. There wasn't too much love going on. No, to be fair, it was simply that Monty's personality was that he needed to let off steam, and one of the ways he would do it would be to get grumpy and angry with those around him, and it was natural that you were going to get, or I was going to get, the fire. And most of the time, in fact, there was never a time I got fired that I didn't get rehired. So people say, how did it start? It just petered out. It was after Celtic Manor, when he won the Ryder Cup as captain, I just saw less and less of him and spent more and more time with Francesco and Ross Fisher. So there was a natural evolution, really. And Colin went off to play, not literally ride off into the sunset, but go off to play on the Champions Tour, which is the golfer's equivalent of riding off into the sunset. So in that particular game, that's a very different project, if you like, for you than helping to redefine Frankie's whole game. I mean, it's more management, isn't it? What you were doing with Monty, helping to manage his ego, his emotions, his mood swings, and get him in that optimum moment when he was going to achieve
high level success at the moment when it mattered?
Yeah, absolutely, Mark. And I could tell just by the conversation at breakfast, and you can imagine with Monty, he did love breakfast, highlight of his day. So what we had at that point was a feeling of whether he was going to play well or not. You could usually tell early doors if he was going to play well or if it was going to be a difficult day. And over the years, it became harder and harder to actually keep him in a stable level. You'd think as he achieved more, it would become easier. But his expectation level just kept coming higher and higher. I don't think any professional sportsman pushed himself any harder. Some maybe have pushed as hard, but Colin really pushed himself because he couldn't accept failure on any level. He just didn't accept it, himself or others indeed. Or even the poor steward walking around the golf course trying to help him find balls or keep the gallery away. Everyone was under the firing line.
I mean, but to have had such a long-term relationship, you're also both changing. The sands of time we're going past. Age brings a certain different perspective on life. You're exposed to more and more influences, so your values and beliefs change over time. So I guess it's that whole principle of impermanence and constantly having to reinvent a long-term relationship, Dennis?
That's a good point, because you've got to be comfortable with each other and the situations you find yourself in, but they're never the same. So you're never in a situation where it should be boring, repetitive, or even just samey, whether it's going to tournaments, whether it's working on the practice ground. There's always got to be a degree of understanding that things evolve, and you do have to have a little bit more a variance in your practice than just showing up and doing the same thing time and time after again. So that experience comes from just working with a lot of tour pros and understanding the mentality of that elite golfer.
And then when we head into other sort of legendary status, I mean, Seve, I know it was a short association, but a completely different way of working from your point of view.
Yeah, I was able to say that I coached Seve for about, I think it was 3-4 weeks. So I count on the long service. I get long service for that. Most of the guys that helped him just had 1 or 2 sessions, if that. He was a very different character. And the sadness that I got him at the end of his career, when he was basically trying to find one tip. Now, if you're a golfer, you said you're not a golfer, but most golfers who play at club level as their hobby are actually looking for one tip that's going to make them great. Well, Seve knew what it was like to be great. He'd been there, but he was still like a hobby golfer trying to find that one tip that would make him Seve Ballesteros again. Unfortunately, there wasn't one. His swing, which relied a lot on hand-eye coordination, just deteriorated as he's back, and his hand-eye coordination got worse. He was a victim of getting older, but he still believed there was Seve inside of him, believing that he could play like the young matador that thrilled the world.
So it wasn't a sort of continuous personal development thing. It was more where you would add little morsels, or what I call the principle of the sponge, sucking up a bit of wisdom from there. It was more, being frank, a brutal search for the answer that would return him to where he'd been before. Absolutely.
And there was a great deal of, he embodied passion, but it wasn't just playing on the range. Every single shot would hit with fierce intensity. And one time he said, what do you think of that swing? I said, well, I didn't see that one. Why? He said, I wasn't looking, Seve. You see the young lady coming across? That's my girlfriend. And as she was at the time, about to become my wife. And he said, no women in the office. And he said it with such a ferocity. I thought I was about to just go, Seve, you can do whatever you want right now. I'm off. But he then had the biggest smile and said, good choice. So he broke up the tension and we had that exchange. But for a moment, he scared me, because the intensity that he would put into his practice sessions was more than I've ever seen with any other golfer. Every shot was hit like it was for the Open. And of course, he knew what it was to win the Open.
And where were you with your coaching career at that point? And how were your self-confidence levels affected by having this incredible name in the world of, let's be honest, not just golf, of sport, and having to feel that you were up to that challenge? I'm not suggesting you're not at any point, Dennis, but you know what I'm saying? We've all got those self-doubts, the little chatterbox in our ear that's saying, oh, can I do this?
It's a bit like I've done it for so long that like a skywalker, he knows he's not going to fall off the rope. You're not really even looking at that sort of thing. You're just looking at dealing with the person in front of you rather than trying to be someone that's going to be all things to all men. He was intimidating, but I've been intimidated by other situations and people, but I've always come back. So I felt my record was okay to deal with it.
Yeah. But it's an interesting dynamic, isn't it? Because we could have PGA members on that are working their way into coaching, and they are going to come across some fairly bristling big characters for whatever reasons. Even if it's at club level, they could be powerful personalities, big members of the business community, and it's a skill set to be able to teach and to coach big personalities, big name, powerful people.
Definitely, and equip yourself is the lesson that I would say to my fellow pros, is that you just got to equip yourself with the up-to-date knowledge, and also look at your own skills. I mean, a couple of pointers, it'd be that video yourself giving a lesson, so that you turn the camera. Everyone uses video to look at the student, but put it on a stand and record the lesson put it far back, and watch how you interact with the person. Let's see if you spend enough time in the 3 zones and how you deal in the 3 zones with the person. So those 3 zones are crucial, and I'm going to tell you what they are. The first zone is when you get virtually next to the player. Harder to do with COVID around now. And in zone 1, you're really talking like you're whispering the secrets of golf. And that's the point where you're really just making sure they've understood the lesson. And then you move a little further away, no more than 2 yards, but now you're conversing with the person, and now you're starting to sense that you now do it, the pupil now does it. But watching football, and that was something I'd like to have discussed with Harry, I came up myself with the zone 3, which is to stand further back from the player. And at that point, you raise your voice and you start to use more of a coaching. Yeah, it's great, Mark. Well done, Mark. That's the way to do it. That looks much better. But if you start to swing poorly, Mark, I don't yell poorly at you. I move in closer back to zone 1 and say, Mark, you can do better than that. But say it quietly. And those zones are very important, that you know how to work in them, work around them, and how to converse with the player. It's about getting the player's attention in many different ways. So, yeah, that's a thing that I would say. You've got to be able to understand your technical stuff, but you've got to work with the player. So if you film yourself as a coach, you go back and replay it and go, I didn't like the way I was scratching my head the whole time, or playing, I got the habit. I got bad sinuses, so I got the habit of doing that. I'll do that a few more times. But you learn about yourself and how you present and how you use words, and are you listening to the person that's talking to that you're teaching? Are you listening to the feedback? Because these are the most important things. Fortunately, I got big ones, the large size, but that's how you learn to be a better coach. You listen.
Yeah, I was watching the Michelle Obama Becoming film to accompany the book at the weekend on Netflix, and there is a moment when she's at a book signing, and each time a person comes up and is frankly a gibbering wreck because they're meeting the former First Lady, what is absolutely astonishing, Dennis, is her complete and total focus is not beyond that person. It's not to the right or to the left. That person gets 20 seconds of her completely and totally devoted attention for that moment, and that can make people feel very, very special.
That's a skill that you either have or you develop, but you must indeed bring with you in your coach's kit bag that particular skill. And there's one other point that I think is a big skill to have. It's actually the feeling that you're working with the person to help them. You're not lecturing them. If they want to go to a lecture, they might listen on what we're doing this afternoon. But if it's one-on-one, you don't shout and scream and try and make your point. And you never get overly down, but you always get overly encouraging. So the first glimmer of something good, you make it sound like it's the best golf you've seen since Tiger Woods won the Masters in '97 for the first but not the last time.
But that principle of the 3 zones you would use that in private as well as in public? You would still use the coming a bit closer to dispense the more difficult bits of information, and the standing back, and I don't care who he is, even though there's only the two of us on the tee, to do the sort of bigger, more approbation stuff?
Yeah, the zones 1 and 2 are fairly much where everyone coaches from. And the great Bob Torrance, one of a Scottish golf coach whose son went on to be winning Ryder Cup putter and also captain at the same place, the Belfry. But Sam used to whisper to the players as if he was giving them the secret of life and golf, and every secret they needed to know. And then he would stand back a little bit and just encourage them. The best I've seen today, I've heard Bob say 5-6 times on the range when I've been around, and I heard him say, the best I've seen today, with a very broad Scottish accent. That made Alex Ferguson sound like a public schoolboy. But actually, Sir Alex, sorry. But actually, he was smart. He was street smart. He knew how to communicate with people and make them feel good.
Yeah, we've got some great questions coming in. I stress to all of you, this is a rare opportunity. It's your chance to ask the questions that you've got burning away of yourself, of a guy who's had nearly, sorry about this, Dennis, half a century in your beloved sport. I'm just going to ask one more, because I think it's kind of related to the zones and talking. When we were having a pre-chat to doing this on Friday, you talked about the principle of the fake argument, and I wondered if you'd like to, I loved this, and I wondered if you'd like to share it with everybody before we get on to Sean, to Adrian, and to Sonia's questions.
Yeah, it's just a little joke that, sometimes you're at a tournament and, you try and break up the tension or just do something that's really different. And when things are going well, it's easier to do. And I was at Dubai, where it may have been Abu Dhabi, but it was certainly at the Desert Swing. And there were two very serious Swedes practicing to the left of Frankie. And Francesco had hit a bad shot and made a bad swing. And I started using cuss words at him, swearing at him, and telling him it was rubbish, very rubbish, if you pardon you. You know the word I use.
We get where you're going.
And he picked up immediately what I was doing. I was just joking. So he started arguing back. And you could see that the two Swedes were just so uncomfortable. They picked their kit off and went. And it was just a bit of childish humor. But it's also, at times, you've got to break up tension. You just can't have tension eating away. Now, you wouldn't do that with somebody you've met for the first time. It's got to be a player you're very comfortable with. It's also got to be done at the right time, when he enjoyed it and it made him relax. So yeah, there's many tools you can use, but sometimes you'll burn yourself if they're too hot. So be careful with that one.
At what point did those tools become intuitive rather than, I'm going to go out today and I'm going to use X and Y and Z? I'm guessing your tool bag now is just something you get up in the morning and don't have to think about it anymore. You pretty much, but you've got all these different little tricks you can bring out if you need them.
Yeah, the tools need sharpening as well at times. You might have all the natural things that you think you have, the instincts. A lot of things that I've learned about coaching, I did instinctively. So it's been a fairly easy journey. I didn't have to really work hard at getting that toolbox. But what I did have to work hard at was the hours that are required to perfect the skill of coaching. And sometimes we start at 8 in the morning and you're finishing at 8 in the evening. The work itself isn't that hard, but the time labor is what it is. It's a labor of time, and you can get mentally and physically tired just standing on a range all day. It isn't the ideal existence, but it's not a bad one for a man of my age to have spent his whole life doing. Since I've never done a real job, as my late dad used to tell me, when are you going to get a real job?
If you are just joining us, our apologies. We have had so many technical problems trying to link Harry Redknapp up, the football manager, obviously the prominent football manager, with Dennis Pugh. Sadly, having started this webinar late, we've just had to move on and hear all this wisdom from Dennis. Our apologies if you're joining in, hoping to see the two of them together. We'll try and find a way to involve them in the future, but we've moved on. Let me deal with a few questions that are coming into us. Get them coming in using the chat room on the left-hand toolbar, please. Sean James, good afternoon. Can I ask Dennis how he helped players deal with high expectation levels?
Yeah, I think that thinking positive, the idea that everyone should be positive and everyone should be shooting for the moon so that they at least get some way forward. I think that's unrealistic, and managing that is one of the hardest things to do as a coach. That is very difficult. And, I would say that the way I personally would tackle that would be if a pupil is off 4 handicap and they're talking about winning the Open, that's too big a bridge for them to take on. So what you do is start talking about the steps that are required. And there's a million steps perhaps, but you pace them out. So let's get from 4 to 3.2 or something. Then we can look at how you're doing you and I working together. If you're the player, you've got ridiculous expectations. Just trying to bring your long-term one. It's often parents that have this as well. Their long-term view and bringing it back to what can we actually do today? We can't win the Open today, but we can go a step closer. So that's how you manage expectations.
Would that be a decent mantra for all of us in the current situation? We can't go out and about. We can't necessarily go off to tournaments, whatever background people are coming in for, a few students from GSI. But I tell you what, we can do one task on our to-do list, which moves us closer to the big picture. Is that something we should all be thinking of at the moment?
Yeah, as I say, I don't really have a mantra that I feel like I'm entitled, like a guru from the time of the 60s, sitting here in my robe and telling you the secret of life itself. But I've been doing the golf secrets for a long while, and I do know that you can't take a 4 handicapper who's got or perhaps their parents have got the dream that they're going to win the Open and then do it in a few short steps. It's a lot of long steps.
Loads of questions coming in. Thank you for bearing with us. Thank you for all your enthusiasm for chatting. Like I am enthusiastic to chat to Dennis this afternoon. Adrian Griffiths, good afternoon. Griffith, good afternoon to you. Following on from Sean's question, how did you help players deal with disappointment, says Adrian?
That's the hardest part of coaching. It's easy to stand as a coach behind the green when your player shot 66 or good scored, he's going to win, or he's having a good day. I always tried when a player on tour was having a bad day, he's going to shoot an 80 or miss the cut, to be there. If I'm there at the event, try and be there for that player as well, because that's a time, when it's hard. People are in a very poor frame of mind, and you've got to help them. And it's the same process that I just talked about. You rebuild by steps. If you've just shot 80 and missed the cut, it's no good saying you're going to win next week, but you're going to do better next week. You're going to play better next week because I've seen something. Right. So what have I seen? I've not seen anything yet, but I want them to know that when we get together on the range, we would have seen something by then and we're ready to rebuild or restart, or just, I saw you were swinging great, Mark. You look fantastic out there, but you didn't really get the right clubs, or you didn't really have the right strategy. So that's part of the toolbox. There's a load of balls, there's a load of tools in there.
I mean, yeah, I guess as well, when you get to know the individual, the emotional intelligence clicks in, and you know the ones that need severity at a certain point, those that can take hard facts straight off the back of the disappointment immediately, and those that might need a couple of days to let it swill through their system.
Yeah, that's the point of being flexible in your coaching and in your dealing with individuals, because there's no doubt that is true. Different people will react differently to their disappointments.
Yeah. Sonia Kulgani, good afternoon to you. Sonia, do you think there's an age where players are too young to be engaged solely in one sport? And if so, what is that age? And when children are so fully engaged in that, Sorry, it's the light. It's not your question, Sonia. It's the light on my computer screen. Well, let's take the first part of that. Do you think there is an age when children are too young to be engaged solely in one sport? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, the first thing is my experience has been that it isn't a number. You can't grade all 6-year-olds as the same thing. And I remember meeting Tommy Fleetwood when he was a youngster. He was doing well as ridiculous age, maybe 6, 7, 8 years old. And at the time, HSBC were doing something called the Wee Wonders. And one of the boy and the girl at the different age groups got some tuition. And I met Tommy for the first time then. And he was totally up for it. And I just said to him that I'm going to give you 2 pieces of advice. You're not going to change that grip ever. And don't turn pro until you're off +5. And he went away and that was it. And I later met him at a dinner with Francesco. You know, they're great mates. And I hadn't seen Tommy for a long while. And I mentioned the fact that lesson, do you remember it? He said, not only do I remember it, I did it. I didn't change my grip, but I did wait until I was +6 to turn pro. So you could see that it had settled in the lad's head, even at that age, and he remembered it as a senior player. You get other children or people who are not really particularly mature at 14 or 13 and can't take on the challenges of the game. I think if you're at a club, the hardest thing to deal with is not the kids themselves, it's the aspirations of the parents. So often, they don't see it as a game. They see it as a way forward for their child to be a superstar or make millions or do whatever their dream was for their kid. And that's bad. That's hard to handle. And the other question there was, should they play loads of games? The more games you are playing, the better you'll play golf if that's your primary one, because you'll learn other skills that come from sport. I played football as a kid at a reasonably high level and I enjoyed it. But when I was about 14 or 15, it was time to concentrate on golf. I knew that I loved golf more than I loved football. And I wanted to make my life's career golf. So yeah, I would encourage a lot of sports and specialization at 5 and 6 and 7. That's sad. That is sad.
Yeah, and the other point Sonny was making was there can be a point then that those players that do start so young go off the rails. It just doesn't work for them. They kind of fizzle out, burn out, haven't been exposed to the things that kids should be exposed to at a young age and drift away from the game.
Well, there's been a well-publicized sadness there about when Tiger Woods' life went off the rails, and his self-confession, if you like, is I missed out on all the other things that other kids did growing up. He didn't. He was one-dimensional, played golf. That's what he did. And, eventually it burns out or burns a bad situation in your life where you start to rebel and want to have some of the things you think you should have had when you were younger.
Can I just ask you about personal reward? You mentioned Tommy there. Would you get almost as much satisfaction out of that feedback much further down the line that you had an influence as you would even through some of the incredible crescendo moments that you've had in your life? Because I would imagine being a golf coach can also, it's quite a selfless act at times if you're not dealing with a pro who's going off to the major tournaments. You might put a little part in and then you don't get your reward until you see that individual much further down the line when maybe they've passed into other hands. Yeah,
but in Tommy's case, of course, there's his own golf coach, his own tour coach, Alan Thompson. Tomo has done all the hard yards, done all the hard work, and all I did was have a little statement to a 7-year-old kid. It's nice because you get to see these situations develop. But there's been many times when the home pro, the guy that's done the real work, has never got the credit. And then at some stage along the way, something ticks for the player. And all the hard work that the home pro's done is never recognized. And this new guy gets all the glossy magazines and the write-ups. And really, you just come along and put the final bit of polish on the Ferrari, but you never built the Ferrari yourself. That's one of the sadder things about top-level coaching. You can get a lot of praise for doing a little work, very little in some cases.
But conversely, and just coming back to some of the work I do with GIS students, I'm constantly saying we're all leaving our imprint on the world constantly. We, every single time we move in public circles with a flick of the eye, a hand gesture. So your example with Tommy shows that you never know when you could be a positive, or if you're having a bad day, a negative influence in somebody's life,
Yeah.
Dennis.
I mean, you'd never want to be having a bad day and convey a negative thing, saying to the, well, you've got no chance. Don't even bother. You haven't got a chance. Who's ever won with a grip like that? And you'll never get down to. I mean, those are stupid things to say when the kid's 6 or 7 years old. Conversely, when they're 26 and 27 years old, and they're shown that they cannot play at the highest level, it's sometimes the bravest and the fairest and the best thing you can do is to call them out and say, not necessarily you're not good enough, but where do you see your next steps? How do you see it progressing? Because there are as many dreamers in golf as there are in any other sport, because ultimately everybody who's played the games hit that good shot that tells them they just do have to hit it more often, and the bad shots less often than they could be. Francesco Molinari, Tommy Fleetwood, and play Ryder Cups. Yeah, so there's a bit of dreaming goes on. That all dreaming isn't necessarily good dreaming. There can be some nightmares as well. Sorry to say that to people.
No, I mean, I think the picture that's coming out here is there's light and shade in all aspects of life. There are positive experiences, negative ones that we pass on and share. Oliver, I'm coming in the direction of your question in a second, but as it's Frankie related, I just want to fill one of the gaps because we haven't mentioned, what did you call him when we spoke last week? Was it the metronome? I'm talking about Nick Faldo, Mr. Rhythm and Routine.
Yeah, well, Nick was really in my early days when I was working under the mentorship of David Ledbetter, who changed the whole concept of tour coaching. The fact that tour players could work and change their swings, and they did need coaches. And David invented a whole new industry called the tour guru or the tour coach. And part of that was when David couldn't be there, David's associate coaches would work with the star players. And my experience with Nick was he didn't need any cuddles, he didn't need any real managing. You just had to give him the facts. He could have taken it from a computer at the time they weren't available, but he didn't need that human integration. He just needed to know, what do I need to do? Or more importantly, this is what I'm doing. Is it right? And am I doing it right? But Nick played in a time when hitting the ball well and controlling its flight and its distance and being able to control it at will was the rewards. Once Tiger came on the scene, that was all gone. And the only rewards now are given to the guys who can hit it, firstly, far enough, and then secondly, far enough, and thirdly, even further, because that's the nature of the game as it's grown. It's not the good nature. We'd all like to see it played as chess as well as shot putting. But what we're seeing now is golf becoming, how far can I throw the shot? You have to think a lot about that. You need to get some technique. You need to get to the gym. You need to be born with physical attributes. Golf used to be better. So my feeling is golf was a better game when it combined, always shot putting was important. But now chess has gone out the window. You don't really have to, not a lot of course management goes on out there, Mark. It's how far can you hit it off the tee? Can you aim it at the flag? And if you can you hold the birdie putt? And if you can't, can you get it up and down? Go on to the next hole and repeat the process. Is that good? That is the way it is. That's the fact. Bit of a rant there. Sorry about that.
No. But listen, but I'm going to have to chuck it back at you because as part of the Frankie rebuild, when you got involved, wasn't power one of the things that you had to work on straight away?
We sat down and we had that exact conversation. You know, golf requires something you haven't got, which is 20 or 30 yards off the tee. And are you prepared to sacrifice everything? And his point of view was, I want to be the best I can be, which is a great statement. He said, I'm not worried about how bad it can get. I just want to be the best. So what does it take? Well, we had to use ground forces better. We had to get him in gym trained better. His trainer, Rob Goldar, has done so much to make him physically stronger, which allowed me to let that flow of energy hit the ball. Because there's lots of golfers out there that think power comes from technique. No, technique actually stops the flow of power. And the most powerful hitters are not really thinking much about technique. They're putting as much energy into that shot as they can physically make. That's what they do. And the point of the coaching there is to make sure that all the breaks that are in technique that stop that flow of energy are taken away. It's an amazing journey, but it can go wrong. So I wouldn't recommend everyone who goes on that route. But if you want to be a top player and you only carry the ball 280 off the tee, you've got to do it. It's not optional, because you won't get to your highest level.
I've got some quotes from Frankie about you. I hope it doesn't get any darker here in London, where I'm talking to you all from. I might have to pull the blind up for the last bit of daylight in a minute. But he says of you, you have a great way of working, not too intense or invasive. Is that a sort of central skill of yours, do you think?
Yeah, I think I know when to make it lighter and when to make it darker. The ability you were talking about, it's all about shades, and it's recognizing when you're in the shade, as you are right now, as you just said, it's quite dark. But there are things in coaching when you're working with a player that you know you can't be too invasive, you can't be too intense. You've got to match their way of doing it. Now, if I was with Sevi, I'd be much more intense, but not invasive. And you just work it to the player you're working with. You remembering that as the coach, you're the one that's got to change to suit them, so that they will change to suit you. It starts with you.
But just to come back to what you've been discussing, Frankie goes on to say that you always had the long-term picture in your head. So you've just discussed that, and you've given him his options and what does he want to do. Little by little, he made me better. So that's exactly what you were just telling us, those small incremental amounts of progress on a day-by-day basis.
We've spent so many hours together, more so than perhaps any other player-coach combination. I wouldn't like to know how many hours has been. There's been many. So we tend to start at times like an old couple. You do start to think that you know what the other person's going to say before they say it. So part of my job is to keep it fresh. And also it's part of bringing, when we started out, it was just me, him and the caddy. And as things have progressed, more and more people are coming on board to give their versions. And you know, you'd look at the team Molinari that was assembled for the Ryder Cup, and Dave Aldred, the famous kicking coach from rugby, he's a performance coach, came on board. Phil Kenyon, probably the best putting coach in the world. James Ridyard, who specialises in short game and computer analysis of swings. He's getting more involved in looking at the swing, not just the short game. Rob Goldrup mentioned the trainer, the caddy Fooch, years on the bag of Justin Rose, so he knows what it's like to be up in the highest levels and win at the highest levels. There's not a member on the squad that you wouldn't think, well, he's good at what he does, and he's proven he's good at what he does. It's a strong team.
We're coming to your question, Oliver, because it's related to where Frankie is now. But actually, something I'd scribbled down is taking stuff from other sports. I'm sure if Harry had been with us, and again, apologies, guys, if you're tuning in late. Unfortunately, we did have technical problems this afternoon. Harry Redknapp couldn't be with us. But have you sucked up influences and looked at other sports and thought, I wonder if we can apply some of the principles from there into what we're doing?
Yeah, the zone 3 is a direct thing of watching football coaches encouraging their players from the touchline, not only in matches, but how they conduct training sessions. And that became very clear to me. The praise that's heard by everyone, and yet you should really make sure that anything negative is done in a more one-to-one situation. And you can say that I probably favour football over any other sport but golf, because that was my second love. So I too am disappointed that Harry's not here. But there we are. Yeah. I spent 15 minutes with him on Sky TV, giving him a lesson in the net. And whilst as much golf he's played, I'm sure he's not going to attribute any of his success to that 15 minutes. More to his natural skill.
I'm not being funny, Dennis. When I rang him and asked him would he come on here today and said you'd be on with Dennis Pugh, the first thing he said to me was, I know Dennis, he gave me a lesson.
Oh, he did remember. Oh, good.
he did. Good. Your influence is far, far greater than you believe. Right, here's the deal. Here's Oliver's question, and I'll be disappearing for 10 seconds because genuinely, if I don't let a bit of daylight in, it's getting darker by the second. I won't be able to read the last few bits I have to do. Oliver Birchall, good afternoon. Has your approach tennis changed with Frankie over the past few months since his form has taken a turn? I'm back in 2 seconds. Keep talking.
Mark, I'll talk to Oliver directly. The thing about Francesco was after losing the Masters at Augusta, there was a time where there was a letdown, and that letdown continued perhaps through the whole of 2019. It was natural in one sense, but there was also started to become some technical issues in the search for power, and that needed to be addressed. And at just the time, starting 2020, that those things were being addressed, came the time of COVID. Now, Francesco always lived in London and travelled the world from a London base. His wife's Valentina Italian, and his two children, as you would expect, living in London, they speak perfect English and perfect Italian. So that lifestyle was really good. They all enjoyed it. But COVID came along and absolutely threw a big spanner into their work, like everyone else's on this planet. They had to move to the States to get closer to the action. So as a family, they could spend more time together. And as a professional golfer, he could spend more time with his family, but also going to and from events without any of the problems. At the time, it was thought that players might have to self-isolate for 2 weeks. You imagine you're going to fly to America, you've got to self-isolate for 2 weeks. You play 2 or 3 events, you fly home to London, you've got to self-isolate. That wouldn't have worked. And unfortunately, it is Oliver that asked the question. Unfortunately, Oliver, that period meant that Francesco did not play an event until he played at Vegas. And last week he played at Houston. So he's played 2 events in the best part of 7 months. And he finished, I think, 20th yesterday. That's a tribute to how much effort he's put in off the tour. So well done to him, and well done to the team that's out there, because I'm not able to travel at the moment, but most of the team that are able to travel are doing a great job just trying to get him back to one of the best players in the world.
I mean,
Oliver's question.
Yeah, I think it did. I mean, there's a situation going on with English football at the moment, particularly with the EFL, where so many managers are missing games through COVID because they're having to self-isolate. And they've got this whole situation where they're at home on the mobile phone to their maybe sports scientist and trying to watch the pictures, but the pictures are on a 45-second delay. Are you able to actually influence Francesco from afar? Mobile phones, FaceTime from one of the other members of the entourage, watch, make notes, feedback after, or talk to him in between holes and things as he practices?
Yeah, it's not so difficult because we know each other so well. So we can. There's a lot of knowledge of what I'm going to say and why I'm saying it to him. So it's easier than perhaps it would have been with anyone else. But there is still that feeling that you're not there. And yes, each evening, probably 3 or 4 calls a week with someone, either Francesco or someone on the squad, just discussing where we're at now. And that's been for the last 4 to 6 weeks as he put himself through the rigors of getting ready to compete again. Hard life as it is for Francesco, he finally I've got to say it, Frankie did go to Hollywood. He went to live in LA, he went to live in Brentwood, and he's a member at Riviera. Doesn't sound movie stars, swimming pools. It doesn't sound the worst place in the world, but that's where he is right now. So let's not feel too sorry for him. And he will be back this week at Augusta. Yeah.
If you didn't get that reference, go through your grandparents' record collection, folks, and look out for a classic album from 1985 called Welcome to the Pleasure Dome, which it looks as though I have a copy of and Dennis has a copy of as well.
Giving away our age and our backgrounds there, Mark.
Geroyd O'Sullivan, good afternoon to you. Hi, Dennis. when you see one of your players going through a rough patch in tournaments, yet see them perform better in your coaching sessions and practice, how do you deal with that situation? What advice would you give to a coach in a similar situation?
Well, that's a situation that I've had with Ross Fisher for the whole of the post-COVID time, when he restarted, and in practice he was performing like a Derby winner, and then in tournaments he wasn't performing to someone that could play at the level he was used to playing at. And there was nothing wrong with his practice, no observable problems, wasn't putting great, but everyone blames their putting ultimately. He just wasn't up to speed yet. And it's really of encouraging and staying patient. I know they want some magic potion. The player himself wants a potion. But if you see no reason to say anything, say nothing. Because accept to be positive and encourage.
Next up, Alistair Welsher. Hello, Alistair. I mean, maybe you could elaborate on this a bit. How do you find that adjustment to working with a team that surrounds Francesco, as opposed to those sparser earlier days?
Well, there is an adaptation that's needed. Your own ego has to be put to one side, because there's other members of the team coming in who are doing their specific jobs. And I remember, certainly I wasn't a very good putting coach, so there was a sense of relief when Phil Kenyon came on board, because that was one problem taken away from me. And I felt that Phil's done as much as any one of the team, but no one's done more than the other. That's the part of this, what they say, the sum of the whole is equal to all the part, or something like that goes into my head. And I think I can see that within the team. Sometimes you have to speak up. Sometimes you have to let others who know more speak up. And there are other times when you just reflect in the glory, or soak up the glory. Winning the Open Championship was a true team effort. But don't forget, Frankie was doing all the real stuff. He was hitting the balls and doing the scoring, but we all enjoyed it immensely. Although the celebration I had there, Mark, was a tuna sandwich and a cup of orange juice on the side of the M6 at some service station. I ought to know, but
no.
My wife had flown back to Munich, here in Munich. We were listening up until the last minute, and there was no great champagne delight until I got home at about 1 o'clock in the morning in London, my London home, and had a bottle of champagne all to myself and just reflected. A bottle of champagne and a bag of Kettle Crisps was my
big bag. I can't see your stomach, Dennis. A big bag or a small bag?
Well, it was a large bag, but it's a relatively large stomach. I'm not doing too bad.
Well, no, you're doing absolutely fine. I mean, there was a point you couldn't afford a bag of kettle chips, but they've been £1 at Sainsbury's of late. Don't all rush, folks. Stay with us to the end of the session. Can I just ask you about involvement in those Ryder Cups? I mean, that's a magnificent record. Involved in 6 of them, every single one a victory. How do you manage your individual going into that squad team situation? How much influence can you have throughout the tournament? And I'll also chuck in as well, I remember interviewing Paul McGinley a few years ago, who was captain in 2014, and he said as captain he tried not to dictate too many team principles because he was embracing individuals. So for example, mealtime in the evening was a sort of a buffet provision, and he said to the guys, you come down within your own routine. If you want to have a shower first, come, no set time. So lots of questions there, but I wondered if you'd just give us a little insight into what it's like to go from coaching an individual into the group situation.
Yeah, well, the first thing is the first 3 Ryder Cups were with coaching Monty. So I was coming along and standing next to Mr. Ryder Cup. I mean, he exemplified the European Tour spirit. And the thing I noticed about him is that everything was about the team and the captain. He suppressed his own ego, and it's a pretty healthy ego that Monty has, and so did the other 11 players. They were prepared to unify around the captain. So the captains that I was under, if you like, as Monty's coach, you were down the totem pole. Sam Torrance, Bernard Langer, and Ian Woosner were the 3 captains, and they basically controlled the players, and the players worked with their own individual coaches, and you didn't get outside of my bubble. Was Monty and I. And that bubble was broken rather hilariously. And people may want to go on YouTube and look it up. On the final day of the singles, Monty got down on the range. First game, first match out. Scott Hoke hadn't arrived because he liked to do his putting practice first. And Monty was the only one hitting balls on the range. And he said to me, well, this feels weird, doesn't it? About 10,000 people, one player. And he hit a couple of balls, and someone in the crowd, I could do better than that, Monty, they yelled. And Monty said, come on down. Now, this is an example of breaking the tension. I didn't suggest it, but once it happened, I went along brilliantly with it. The fella was still eating his bacon roll with a cup of good old Tetley tea or whatever, and grabbed hold of Monty's wedge with these mustard-infused fingers and was useless. Hit the ground twice, and it was all being filmed by Sky Television on the range at the Ryder Cup. And what the Americans must have thought about that would be a picture to see what they were doing in the locker room. But there was this feeling that Monty would never have done that. Nobody would have believed Monty would have done that on the last day of a major championship. But he did. And to finish off the story, you can see if you watch that how I was cleaning that grip in the water and trying to get that mustard off for about a good minute and a half because the caddy had disappeared because he'd forgotten the strap. Good old Andy Prodger. So there was literally me, Monty, and Mr. Mustard Fingers. That's the Ryder Cup.
Wow.
And he went on to win that day, I think 5-4 or 6-5. It was a healthy margin. This story can tell me 5-4 probably.
Can I ask you, out of those 48 years involved in golf, the moment, the greatest buzz when it all came together for you and you allowed yourself to feel great? I don't know, how long do you allow yourself to feel great for after something good happens in life? We're all different.
Well, the best moment for me ever was when my wife won the Australian ladies mid-amateur by hitting the ball stiff at the last with a 7-iron on a par 3. And that was my biggest buzz in golf because she was blowing it big time. And I knew that 2-hour drive back to Munich from Austria wasn't going to go well if she blew this tournament. And with the very last shot she hit, she managed to win it. And that was a better celebration than the glass of champagne, a bottle of champagne and a bag of crisps. So not a bottle of lager and a bag of crisps, a bottle of champagne and better. So yeah, more so if you look in the professional side, it's so much nice to win, but it's so horrible to lose. So like the players, you like the victories, but you never celebrate them as much as you should because there's always, let's go on again. And you lose most of the time. I mean, 90% of the time, a golf pro loses, even if he's a good one. So golf coaches will lose by definition. So yeah, the spectacular celebrations at Ryder Cups, you know, the one in when Mollywood was involved, the Paris one, when an unreasonable amount of champagne was drunk by one and all, but heads were sort of bad the next day. But you know, it's these things, these sporting moments, when they're shared with others as a celebration, are better than just doing it on your own in the room. Even though it was that lovely bottle of champagne and packet of crisps, which will be emblazoned on your mind now forever.
Well, I was about to say, if anybody's tuned in for the last 10 minutes, you've just come across a Champagne Charlie. I have to say, you missed the first 50 minutes where Dennis really earned his stripes. Listen, we've got, I want to finish things up. We've got PGA members obviously tuning in. We've also got friends of the Global Institute of Sport, the sister organization, VSI, and people either doing courses or might do courses. I mean, GSI specialize in courses covering everything from business, marketing, media, finance and sport, along with sporting directorship, media training, public speaking. Can I have, do you want to give me 3 short best pieces of advice of a general nature, or do you want to give me one absolutely humdinger? It's up to you.
Well, in leadership terms, yeah. Well, the theme that I've tried to bring across is be relaxed and comfortable in your environment and know for sure that every journey is loads of steps, and skillfully plan those steps in your mind, but don't plan too far ahead because there will be points where you go off at tangents and then come back onto that main road. Life is never just the Forrest Gump bowl of chocolates. Everything's different. Life is never, ever simple, and you're never going to get the perfectly plotted journey. But you've got to make sure that you take care of yourself and your career, and do the things that you think are right at the time, whatever the circumstances are. But be prepared to react to circumstances. They're never what you want, they're never what you plan, but they are the circumstances. And if you can't react to circumstances, you can't be successful.
That's a pretty good epitaph for the year, isn't it? Be prepared to react to circumstances.
Yeah.
Which, fingers crossed, with the talk in the UK today about that.
And thanks for being with us. Thank you, Dennis. I think I'm just going to jump in here while Mark seems to have frozen. I can see his screen going black. Hopefully he'll be back with us in a short moment or two. Dennis, you were just wrapping up on your key takeaways for our attendees today, and the key lessons for them to take away from today's session. Here he is, Mark.
Wow, that was me, was it, that froze? On my screen, it's Dennis that froze, and we're having some gremlins today. I hope you can see me. Dennis, was there anything else you wanted to finish off with?
No, I think that, that last question you asked me.
I'm a little bit confused as to whether you can hear me or whether it's Dennis that's talking or we're talking against each other. So I tell you what I am going to do. I am going to thank Dennis Pugh very much for his time today. It's been fantastic. I really appreciate you guys sticking with us. I know it's been not quite what we intended when we were due to set up at 3 o'clock. The Harry Redknapp couldn't be with us. I do just want to say to you, if you're a PGA member, then the new PGA Learn platform will be launched for you later this month. It'll have an assortment of educational content and resources for you to engage with. Things like this session, for example. So do keep an eye out for that. If you have any questions, then drop an email to the address being displayed in the chat box any second now. And a big thank you to everybody at GIS, the Global Institute of Sport, which provides all those sport-related degrees and qualifications, and is now expanding into professional development. If you want to find out about some of those or the collaborations with in the future with the PGA, then also visit the link now appearing in the chat box. I'm hoping you're still with us. I'm sorry it's been a bumpy ride along the way, but I hope you've enjoyed yourself. I'm Mark Clement. Enjoy the rest of your day. And thanks for joining us for the inaugural GIS PGA Collaborative Webinar. Good afternoon.